This is a phanatron tube in operation. The shift in brightness is due to a shift in the audio frequency applied to the radio wave. This is a blepharisma organism undergoing disintegration at an applied MOR, or mortal oscillatory rate, of 3,050 cycles. At a later date, it was found that a better MOR for blepharisma is 924 cycles. The difference is that in about 40 seconds at 924 cycles, many blepharisma will start to disintegrate. At 3,050 cycles, a process you're seeing here took approximately 20 minutes to get to this point. This is all live time, however. What is interesting is how the organism disintegrates and then forms these large globules, as you can see in the organism on the right. This is a very common occurrence. It occurs in many different types of organisms. This is a close-up of the same large globule that was on the right. You can see something's kind of happened to reorganize the material that came out of the blepharisma, and it's essentially just disintegrated down into these small particles. This is another blepharisma. Typical also of the blepharisma is that the cell wall somehow becomes permeable to the surrounding fluid media, and the organism will swell. Also, they will stop motion. Normally, these are very highly motile and swim quite rapidly across the screen. But as you can watch here, it just keeps getting a little bigger. Finally, they blow out at the bottom. This seems to be pretty standard behavior for this type of explosion or disintegration. My opinion that in some way the device causes some sort of osmotic gradient to occur across the cellular membrane, perhaps through a process of what's known as electroporation. More investigation needs to be done to verify this. You can see the interior of the organism has somehow undergone a reorganization, and as it disintegrates, it just falls into this small particulate matter. Again, all photography and videography in this particular videotape is live time. There is no stop motion here. another little protozoan. Normally this fellow, again, is very highly actively motile, but as it comes under the influence of the wave at its MOR, it starts to become immobile or semi-paralyzed, you might say. You can see, although it has flagella, they are not really beating synchronously enough for it to move. This is a few minutes later. As you can see, the interior of the organism somehow has changed its composition and refractility to the light. If you watch closely, you can see the flagella up around the mouth parts start to beat asynchronously and, in fact, actually stop beating. There goes a few of the flagella up around the mouth parts at the top of the screen there are starting to actually fall off. This is a paramecium, and he's under the influence of his MOR. The body's slightly swollen. The MOR of this particular organism is 1150 cycles, and typically they are not motile when they're fully under the influence of the MOR. See, he's just starting to open a few areas within the cell wall here. These dark spots are starting to occur within the body. Apparently he's blown out on the back side of the organism. This is a rotifer. Now, this organism is kind of interesting because it has a very tough outer shell around it. What happens in this particular situation is that I believe that the device somehow liberates some of the enzymes within the organism's lysosomes, and it basically will self-digest. If you notice, the interior is pretty well differentiated here. In a few minutes, you'll notice that it just becomes rather just little more than a bag of mush on the inside. This occurred at an MOR of somewhere between 1950 and 2150 cycles. I really did not work out an exact MOR for this organism, but it lies somewhere within that range. What's nice about this particular shot is you probably noticed that little organism that swam in and out of the video there. Gives an idea that this is not being induced through some artificial media such as high current of ultrasound or perhaps electricity or some other media. This is actually done by the plasma tube being about 4 to 5 feet away from the microscope. You can see how the interior of the organism is starting to de-differentiate. filaments here, or small flagella, I guess, along the exterior are starting to fall off. At this point, he's pretty well self-digested his entire interior. Again, I believe this is due to lysosomal rupture. This entire process from the start of exposure to approximately this point was about 30 minutes. This is another paramecium, and I'd like you to look closely at the body. Notice it has these rather crystalline-like structures in it, and there's a little bit of density to the structure of the organism as it's under its MOR. Also, if you notice, it's not really highly motile at the moment. Become somewhat confused. This is typical of paramecium when under the influence of their MOR. It takes a few minutes to get here. These organisms do have a very simple nervous system. Notice how the cell wall is becoming a little more sharply defined. This is the same fellow a minute or so later. Starting to rupture in the upper right-hand corner of the screen. As the paramecium disintegrates, its cell wall seems to fall into these little lipid crystalline-like structures. At least I would assume these are lipids. after a couple of minutes, there just isn't too much left of the organism. Pretty well disintegrates into just particulate matter. Now this is a group of paramecium under the influence of their MOR. As you can see, if you've ever seen paramecium before under a microscope, these fellows are quite motile, but here they're quite all stunned, and that's typical of paramecium at 1150 cycles when the device is operating. Now this is another paramecium that's just stunned, but look at the difference. He has not been under the influence of the MOR for very long, and the body does not have all this crystalline dedifferentiation, or shall we say, some kind of change that has occurred. Still quite translucent. This is another paramecium. All of the organisms, for the most part in this film, nearly all of the organisms within this film are of the protozoan family, which is significant insofar as protozoans are a major pathologic problem for mankind. Primary of these would be malaria. Malaria affects many millions of people every year and kills about 1% of the people that it infects, as well as causing a lifetime of disability and impairment for many people that lack the facilities to be properly treated for their infection. Notice how the density of the organism has changed with time while under the influence of its MOR. Here's another one that's just kind of undergoing an explosive evisceration. At a certain point in total time of exposure, all the organisms will explode, but some are a little more susceptible than others. In this picture you can see a couple of blisters actually forming on the body of the organism. This is the same fellow we were watching a minute ago. He's starting to explode now. Just a large mass of food. See the blisters on the right-hand side of the body? And here's a situation where all of these exploded more or less around the same time. Has to do with total time of exposure. This is a white blood cell in live time. And this is some of the influences that the device produces on white blood cells. It increases their motility as well as their phagocytic ability. At the moment, although it may be a little hard to see, it's actually engulfing a particle here at the bottom of the screen. A little black round particle just swallowed. And it's going to go down a little bit and do this again. another particle it's engulfing. On its leading edge to the right. Here it's picking up another particle. This is a blepharisma. You notice the little densities at the rear of its tail. Keep watching, you'll keep seeing the body swell. watch the large blue globule that just formed at the bottom of the screen and watch those little particles just kind of keep increasing. And what's quite a bit of curiosity here is although these particles are now leaving through a rupture in the wall of that blue sac, keep watching the films. You'll see these keep materializing and actually increase in number. May I also point something out? There seems to be kind of a current flow around the particular piece of structure here, but if you watch some of these little particles, some of these are moving against the current flow. Many of the particles, however, are just showing plain old Brownian motion. Don't know what's going on here. Some of these particles just exhibit Brownian motion. Some of them seem to be actively motile on their own. This may be what Dr. Béchamp originally called as a microzyma. I have no idea. Or Dr. Naissance might call a somatite or somatid. This is another blepharisma. This particular video was made with my new condenser. It's made in Russia. And it has a much better quality and sharper resolution. what's interesting about this particular video is that the cell wall here is undergoing complete disintegration. You can actually see it fall apart. See, there's one of those globules that just kind of self-formed itself, full of all this small particulate matter. All this film was done under the 40x objective. We're going to take this up to the 100x objective here in just a second and give you a real close-up. Now we're under the 100S objective, and if you are looking at this particular video on a 27-inch monitor, the magnification factor here is approximately 11,000 times. This particular little globule here in the center of the screen I would estimate to be about the size of a red blood cell or a little larger, maybe about 8 microns across. What you're looking at now is a slightly blurred view, because what I've just done is I've flipped in the digital view zoom on the video camera, which is is a 4x zoom. So right now you're looking at something that's being magnified about 44,000 times if you're looking at it, the video on a 27-inch TV. Problems are at this type of magnification. One is you lose resolution. As you can see, it's pretty blurry. And the second thing that happens is that I'm not too sure. Sometimes you get a whole lot more information out of it, but sometimes you do. You can pull in quite close and see a little more that you could see otherwise. Now this is back at the standard setting. This is about 11,000 diameters, again on a 27-inch TV. The immense magnification factors come from the fact you have a TV screen of a certain size and a size of what's called a charge coupled device chip inside the video camera. And the smaller the chip, the smaller the cross-section of the slide it looks like, and therefore the larger the magnification factor. This is another protozoan. This fellow has an MOR of somewhere between 930 and 1,000 cycles. He's going to undergo a cell wall rupture, which probably is due to some sort of osmotic problems within it. A curious little organelle. Have no idea what that is there towards the center of the screen. We have a nice little rupture of the cell wall, and it's kind of peeling outer membrane off the organism. It's just ruptured. We've got a little surface tension holding the interior protoplasm kind of against the body of the organism. This is another paramecium, and you can see very clearly there's a cell wall rupture here. Integrity of the wall is completely failed, yet the outer membrane is still intact. If that membrane that is peeling off there is what's classified as a unit membrane, then its thickness is about 100 angstroms. Here we have a nice picture of the blister phenomena. Again, this is a paramecium. They seem to do that quite readily. Now, this is the blood of a 25 to 26-year-old male. Came to me, wanted to see if a device he had built to my specifications was operational. This is prior to any exposure. The fellow had undergone surgery approximately 30 days earlier. He has facial and throat cancer. Actually had to lance this fellow 3 times to get any blood out of him. His blood was so clumped together like this. Needless to say, he complained about being cold a lot. These are some white blood cells there at the top of the picture. You can see the blood kind of sticks together in clumps, but it also kind of pours like honey or molasses. I mean, these cells are pretty well stuck together and agglutinated. Again, this is prior to any exposure to the device that he has, the plasma tube device. The background's just pretty blank and nice and black. That's the way most people's blood looks. There's a few little fibrin clots here or there that's not really seen real clearly on this video. You also notice most of the red blood cells are not very round looking, quite crenellated. Now this is after the first exposure, approximately 24 hours afterwards. See, there's a little bit of particulate matter in the background. The blood cells tend to unclump slightly. They're still all quite damaged looking, the blood cells, but you can see all the particulate matter that's been released by the use of the device. There's also some cellular debris here and there. There's a large clump of cells that were broken off by the device. A rather large cell, squamous, plate-like. This is a white blood cell, has some curious anomalies. What I'm doing right now is I'm using inverse video, which gives a 3D-like effect, and you can get a concept of what the surface of the cell looks like. You see from this video, it looks like this fellow has a hole punched in him there or something. Not a very healthy white blood cell. There's a little anomaly found floating in this fellow's blood. Again, this is after the first exposure. Believe this is an abnormally dividing bacteria. Looks a little bit like a propeller. This is another abnormal finding in this fellow's blood. This is under 100x magnification with a digital zoom full out, so you're looking at about 44,000 diameters here. So you can see there's some advantage to being up with that kind of power. This is from a scraping from an external tumor that was growing out of the fellow's nose. Here's a little anomaly found. Upper part of the screen there. There's a couple of what look like probably staphylococcus. This is a regular little zoo growing here. Some of these are infected cells, parasitized, you might say. Now, this is after fellow's second exposure to the device. You can see the amount of cellular debris has picked up considerably. There's larger cells, there's more cells. There's just generally quite a bit more debris within the blood here. At this point, it was recommended that he not use the device for several days in order to let his blood clear itself of all this debris. That's something that does need to be developed, is some kind of protocol as to how much debris a person can tolerate and that his body can safely remove. A load factor, so to speak. If the rate of removal of this cellular material and the death rate of the cells is higher than the rate at which the cells are being reproduced, then wherever this material is coming from should disappear. But if the growth rate of the tumor, or what have you, that this material is originating from, is higher than its death rate and the ability of the body to remove the material, then something must be done to stabilize or slow the growth of the tumor. See, it's just loaded. This is after the second exposure. Quite a dramatic release of material here.